All right, Luis, we're in 5, 4, 3, 2. Good evening, everyone. We're here at the Budget Committee for the trustees and our staff. It's a meeting before the board meeting on Wednesday, June 3rd. And we'll start with if there's any updates that need to happen, and then we'll lead on over to the board trustees to start asking questions about the any of the budget items for that are listed on the board meeting for the 3rd. Do we need to update on any items before we start from the trustees? Or are we good to go ahead and start on the board agenda? Dr. Burke, Trustee Burke.
I was just wondering if there was any public comments that had been submitted for.
Rice, did you receive any public comments?
No, I did not. I did not receive any emails with any questions.
Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and start with questions from the trustees on the budget items from the board agenda. And actually, I'm sorry, I forgot to do introductions. So we can start with introductions from the trustees first, and then we'll have staff.
Ann Crosby, I'm a trustee to the Board of Education.
Michelle Burke, also a board trustee.
We can start with staff.
Marcus Battle, Associate Superintendent.
Kelly Lynch McMahon, Director of Facilities.
Rabi Pascual, Director of Accounting.
Raisa Basi, Director of Budget, Audit, and Attendance.
And I'm Raul Zamora, Acting Superintendent. Okay, now we can start with questions from the trustees.
The first thing I have, Michelle, is on 11.1. I don't know if you have something before that. You're muted, Michelle.
Sorry, I've been Zooming all day. I do not. Thank you. Please go ahead with 11.1.
Thanks. I'm just concerned. It used to be that we budgeted for textbook adoptions because of our financial situation. We haven't been able to do that, but I think that we have to have a better idea of how and what textbooks we can expect coming forward. I'm concerned if we're by purchasing some textbooks, we may end up not being able to purchase other textbooks, which we may, had we known, have prioritized over some over others. I don't know. So although I don't envision having an issue with this specific textbook, I am concerned that we're not really planning for these. So I'm hoping we can get information that allows us to have an idea of what's on the horizon so we can be planning effectively.
Yeah, so Kim Kelly, our Director of Instruction, is working on a list that gives us a timeline of adoptions that are coming up. So they'll come to the board over the next week or so. So the board will have that outlined for review to see what's upcoming for the textbooks adoptions.
Fantastic.
I'm sorry, I did have some questions on that, but I can wait. Some of them were related to the piece. Well, maybe we should answer this. The piece about the not choosing to do all of the chem books, but going ahead with the physics in the universe. And these aren't, correct me if I'm wrong, these aren't textbooks per se in the traditional sense. These are more consumables, correct?
Right, there's supplemental material, correct.
Yeah, well, so I kind of see supplemental and consumables as two different things. So correct me if I'm wrong. Consumables is something like a workbook where students could write in, and then it's theirs, and we have to replace it every year, as opposed to a textbook that we don't have to replace every year. So the way the item was written, it sounded like a textbook, but I've heard from elsewhere that it's a consumable. And so that was one of the questions I'd actually asked, but that also impacts budget. So I can either wait if that answer isn't ready, or if you know something that you can share.
So it is a consumable, but it's going to be used as a supplemental. They're not going to allow the students to write on them so that we can reuse them continuously.
Okay, okay.
Good question. What is the next thing that you have, Michelle?
First, I had some questions about Horner, and I'm not clear on some of the language that's being used in the item in terms of, we knew there was a delay, but now we're being told because of the delay, we have to hurry up and finish when we thought we had time. So I'm confused because obviously we're spending more money for to give to a firm to do work that I thought we'd already been doing. And so it's similar to other projects where we have multiple amendments coming back to us with, we need more money because of X, Y, and Z happening. And I'm trying to understand, because I don't think I have a good sense of what really is in our control and what isn't in our control in terms of all of these amendments. And I feel like we're, you've heard me say this before, and other trustees, I feel like we're more of a rolling bank account for some of these firms. We're just giving them money because they're telling us we need to give them money. So I'm not feeling like we have, or I don't have a good sense of what controls we have and don't have, and why does it feel like things are just coming back and coming back.
So can I ask Trustee Burke, specifically, is there a question, or were you just making a statement about Horner? Because I want to make sure if there's a question, I can address it.
Thank you, Kelly. If I'm going, it's my frustration that I express. My question, I guess, specifically is under current status, where it states, due to the complexity, delayed schedule, and needed acceleration of the current project schedule, Roblin is requiring additional staffing necessary to complete the project. So the question or the way that I'm puzzled, the reason that I'm puzzled is we knew that we were putting it off for a year. So that was the delayed schedule. That was something we all agreed upon last year. But now that we're in a different place and our staff has already started moving, what is the needed acceleration that requires additional staffing? That's what they're requesting. They're requesting more money for staffing, but we've already been on this new timeline for a year. So I don't understand why we're accelerating something when we had a plan in place a year ago.
So to answer that question, Horner has been a very challenging project, and there have been several challenges that they have dealt with at the site that have required more time than what their original contract had allotted for in terms of hours of staff spending on particular issues. And also the complexity of some of the challenges that we've encountered were, of course, not anticipated. And so with that, you have to have staffing that has more experience and historical and seasoned knowledge in terms of how to solve problems. And so if you all recall, Roblin was originally brought in to basically backfill a contract with CCMS TV because they were not performing very well. And we had requested changes in staffing because the staff that was assigned was not performing well. So Roblin was brought in basically to replace them and shore them up for a very specific period of time. And the contract, and I believe, because this happened prior to my arrival, I believe that there was a series of items that caused the project to be delayed that then pushed it to be a year-long delay that I guess wasn't anticipated. There was another challenge that occurred due to PG&E and Alameda County Water District late last year that caused the schedule to be extended even further beyond the initial year delay that originally was agreed to. So now Roebelin has now basically exhausted, based on the original agreement that they were hired to do, has now been required to extend their contract through the end of this year. And so the staffing person who's actually assigned to this project is also in Robelin's world, because he wasn't originally allocated for the entire duration of our project, which originally was supposed to end in June, is now being assigned and carried through the end of this year. So they're asking one to bring on additional help for him, because he's in essence managing the amount of work that two people would have. And now they're asking to bring on a younger, sort of like a project engineer, to support him to be able to actually manage and carry this project through the end, which has now been extended through the end of the year, which we notified you guys about, I believe, in January or early February. So
Can I interrupt, please, Kelly? I'm sorry.
I hope that answers the question.
Well, it does and it doesn't. So, and it's, I understand that, some of this happened prior to you coming on board. And so my immediate question is, when you say the end of the year, do you mean the end of the fiscal year or the calendar year? Because I thought we had a move-in date for August. I mean, like an open date for August. So I think I must have missed something.
No, actually, the way that this project has been structured, the occupancy and move-in of the facility will occur by the beginning of this school year, but the play fields and the outer landscape area, that is going to be going on through, I believe, late October, early November for a turnover during the Christmas break. But the facility itself is going to be, available and functioning. And we have moved staff into buildings 1, 2, and 3, I believe, or A, B, and C, as part of the phase 1. So that has occurred, and they're in the process of kind of unpacking and settling in and getting ready for the school year in August.
So can I be, and this is not directed at you, it's going to sound blunt, but my question is, why is Roeblin's need to bring on people and X, Y, and Z? Why is that my problem? You know what I mean? Why is this our problem? We contract with them to get the job done, and Roeblin or whatever firm, and this is more of a broader question, whatever firm keeps oh, well, this has come up. And so, but you've contracted and you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And why does it become our issue to have to fix with money all the time?
Is this something that we have caused, or is it something external to us?
Yeah, well, and that's a nicer way of putting it. Thank you.
To answer your question, it's a little bit of both, but the way that the contracts are structured, there's a certain amount of time that's allocated that staff spends that costs a certain amount of money. So we don't have like a blanket contract to say, oh yeah, if it takes 225 hours in a week to finish, that's what we're gonna, that's what we're gonna get. It's based on a full-time person, or in school terms, 1 FTE. So that's how they base their contract scope. And so when you exceed that, that is what you're experiencing, is those hours have been exceeded in terms of what we have been contracted by them to provide.
So if it's that we are asking them to do more or different, that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Why, if it's just that we're contracting them for a certain length of time, what is their incentive to not exceed that time continuously if it means they get paid more?
I think that's a hard question to answer because each project, of course, is different and has its own personality and dynamics at play. But the incentive for the consultants is that, of course, their reputation is on the line. So if you commit to something, of course, you want to be able to fulfill it based on what you've obligated yourself to. Um, but in certain situations, and we've encountered several of them, um, there are instances where you do exceed the amount of time that you allocate to spend on a particular problem. And in this particular instance, Horner has experienced, in my opinion, a large number of unexpected occurrences that have taken a lot more resources on all of our parts to actually try and solve and keep the project moving than to just say, I'm only going to spend 5 hours on this item to solve it, when you expend those 5 hours and you still haven't solved the problem.
Can you give us an example?
Let's see. So one of the current items that we're dealing with at Horner is, it's the ball fields, the softball field, and the back, sort of the back end play area. There were some backflow preventers that were originally there, that were the original backflow preventers, and they were buried. They were identified on the plans as being in one location when in actuality they were clear across the field in a totally different location. The information the contractor was given, they priced it based on them being in that particular location. When they were actually discovered to be 125 feet away from where they actually expected to find them to do their work, well, guess what happened? That's 125 feet of material that now we have to run back to the main line to actually have the controller put in, that we didn't necessarily expect to have to pay. So it's those kinds of things, and the time that was spent to do the investigation, figure out a solution, come up and design a solution that is different than what you originally had designed for. All of that accumulates and takes time that then is compounded and monetized, that we end up with a change order or a change or an amendment, or that kind of change that impacts us. So
I think that kind of information is really helpful. I see, Marcus, you were trying to jump in there, but let me just say, that kind of information is helpful for us to understand that it's an issue on our end and not theirs. And therefore, whether or not it was something we should have been able to foresee, to have had better plans or whatever is secondary. In order for them to move forward, they have to address it.
Right.
Sorry, Marcus, what did you want?
I mean, just for clarity, Kelly, are you able to say in this for this particular item, if this item did not move forward, what would that mean for the project? I mean, what does that mean?
So in this particular instance, we have resolved it and that has been dealt with. But if we didn't resolve it and come up with some type of solution, then we would have ball fields that are not irrigated and lighting that wouldn't occur in the way that it was initially designed, because the old systems, the locations and information that was provided would have not been tied back into the new facility. So
maybe I'm not asking my question right. I'm saying,
okay.
if this item is not approved, we don't approve this additional staff member, you're saying our irrigation and our fields and everything are not going to, I mean, I'm not clear on what.
Oh, no, I guess I misunderstood the question. I apologize. I thought we were talking specifically about the example that I gave you versus
No.
the actual item of the
No,
additional.
I'm talking about the actual item.
Oh, okay. No, the actual item for the additional staffing, it means that we have the potential of not having staffing in place for the duration of the project. And that would mean that either Vanner would have to pick up and max out their staff even more than what they already are, or the district would have to either take their own staffing and have them augment that, which, you know, there's a learning curve and historical knowledge that's involved in just managing and executing. And we already have demonstrated that we don't have the capability in-house to do that.
So I think one of the
terms of our being able to understand an item and whether it makes sense, one, to agree to it, but also to learn from it, so that we don't continue to have extension of contracts beyond what they're meant to be. Now, there are times when errors are made on our behalf, that there are things that our staff has done. This doesn't mean it's an opportunity to berate our staff. I think that that's not productive.
No, that's not the intention.
Yeah, I think that there shouldn't be a fear to give the full scope of what the issue is so that we can address it and learn from it. I think since we're a learning institution, if we continue to not learn from it, then there is a problem that I think gets down to what Dr. Burke is worried about. It's like, okay, what is happening that we keep getting these? And how can we address the underlying issue so that it doesn't continue to happen?
I think to answer that, one of the things that we are in the process of doing and that we have started to do more of is really pin down our scopes of work when we're issuing and bidding projects. As I had shared with you guys before, I think that there was a gap in terms of what you all's expectations were and what you actually got based on documentation and scope of work that was described and issued to the actual contractors who were building it out. And so I'm trying to make sure that that gap is closed so that it's this, we're all expecting the same thing and that we're all on the same page at the very beginning of the project versus, well, I thought I was getting this versus, well, no, you're actually just getting this. So I'm trying to squeeze that so we don't have that gap anymore.
I appreciate that. And if I can just go back to your example of the Horner Fields and the 125 feet. And similar to Trustee Crosby, I don't want heads to roll here. That's not my intention, but obviously a mistake was made because somebody didn't know that they were 125 feet in a different place. So is that we didn't have correct plans, that somebody who was doing the design, I mean, obviously nobody went and moved since we contracted. Nobody went and moved anything 125 feet. They've always been in that location. So is it something on our part that we don't have the correct plans of where things are laid out so that when we do have something like this come up that, I mean, I'm just thinking we need to have blueprints or architect, but we need to have something for every single site that we have,
Sure.
right? So that we know that it's there and not there.
Well, it's my understanding that those particular items predated like 1962 or something like that. So the staff that you have available and who are working right now, of course, that predates all of us. And so there were documents, but the documents only went back to like 1974. So one of the things that we're working on in facilities is looking at basically compiling all of our historical data and all of our record documents and putting them in a virtual database so that we can not have these kinds of issues happen again, because M&O has their plans that they work from, and then facilities has their library, and sometimes the two are not always synced up. And so we require the designers to talk to facilities and of course back their information up with M&O. But there are those situations where if something, it just is so very old and it's the original, and even in many instances, the city didn't even have actual documentation or up-to-date information because their data only went back so far. So as we move through the process, we are going to try and address that by having a very comprehensive digital accessible library that we can consolidate all of our information and have readily accessible current real-time data so that we don't keep stumbling over these kinds of issues.
Well, and I think it's also for future sites.
Sure.
We are doing the research in advance to do whatever kind of testing. Okay, we think this located here. You know, what is the cost associated with testing to make sure it's really there versus what it will cost if it turns out it's incorrect. And at times it may be to go forward with the assumption ends up, you know, looking like it'll be cheaper. But those are the processes we need to be thinking through.
So just so you guys know, that's going to be coming your way in one of the board updates very soon.
So I think that's inclusive of all the projects that we're learning from Horner specifically that I've
Yes.
learned in the past 2.5 months, the complexities and errors that have occurred there that will not be applied in the future middle school conversions such as Thornton and Centerville. I mean, I think having that watchful eye of what needs to take place or not take place, so those amendments are again brought to a minimum or zero. I know a lot of it is your inheritance of the projects, but I think the board still is questioning. Here we go again,
Right.
every board meeting, especially with Horner. So anything that you can do to minimize that part of it, and I know a lot of it was again before your time and you're now trying to resolve it, but I think being upfront with it and getting it out there, because it's even for myself, I was frustrated, and I shared that with you with
Sure.
Horn, with that piece of it. I just want to be conscious of the time, so I'm not sure the questions that we have.
Yes, I'm ready to move on, and I'm sure Ann is too. One last thing, Kelly, in a previous meeting, you had mentioned, you know, we should be going away from leaseback. And I wasn't sure if you were aware that Corner is the first leaseback that we embarked on, because we were given advice that that was the way to go. So it's not like all of our projects had been leaseback until Corner. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
And what do you have on next?
What do you have?
Of course, there's the whole budget conversation.
Yeah, we probably need to get on that. I think that I do have questions about some of the things, like, it seems to me, you know, I don't know whether things like the crossing guard, this has to be decided now, because it seems to me that depending on what happens with instruction this coming year, you know, does this make sense? Do we save money if we aren't actually on site? And how does that happen? But I think probably given the limited time, having budget conversation might be the.
So really quickly on the crossing guard, we did receive some sort of a credit that we weren't charged for the remaining amount. I think it was 50,000, and Marcus can correct me if I'm wrong with that. And so I'm assuming that since the city didn't meet their threshold, they're not charging that. So this is for next school year. And I'm assuming that the same thing will happen, that if we don't, or the city doesn't employ the crossing guards at the beginning of the school year, they're not going to meet their threshold again. And so that following year, if we do use the crossing guards, because this is just a 1-year extension, that money may also be recouped for the district not to pay. Did I summarize that correctly, Marcus?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
So if we can go on to the budget then, and then, and if there's time, just, I had a quick question about the LCAP surplus, but let's do budget. And go ahead if you.
No, go ahead.
I know that we're all we're all in the same place, in that we don't have a lot of information and that it's constantly changing. So I understand that, and I understand the predicament of having to do a presentation like this, knowing that tomorrow something else could be coming from the legislature or the governor. So I appreciate putting this together every year, knowing again that when we vote on something at the end of June, it's going to look very different than what we know now. So I just need some clarification for my own understanding. In the PowerPoint presentation, slide 5, I just, if you can just walk me through, and I'm sorry if I'm slow in understanding it, if you can walk me through the statutory COLA and the suspended -7, you know, that row, if you could walk me through that, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, first of all, the governor in his January budget had proposed X amount of COLA. And I'm going to ask Mr. Abasi about the COLA. We just finished up another meeting, and I believe that the COLA amounts that's listed on here, comparing the January to the May, the 2021 and 22-23 appear to be the same, but that is not correct, because the 2021 I believe was a little different in the 22-23. Can you confirm that, Rice, before I continue?
Yes, in box number 3, we show 3 COLAs. 2021 is 2.29%, and then it changed to 2.31% in May revision. The second line should read 21-22. That's a typo.
Okay.
So that should be 2021-22. And the COLA is 2.48%. And the explanation of 7.92% minus. Marcus, you want me to explain that, or you're good?
If you'd like to, you can go ahead. That's fine.
Okay, so that's how it works. So suppose we have allocation of $100. State is going to apply statutory COLA of 2.31% on that. So that becomes $102.31. Then they are going to apply 10% reduction on that. So that becomes a difference between 102.31 minus 10%. So that's about $92 and something. So the difference of the new amount and the old amount is minus 7.92%. So it's not straightforward 7.92% reduction. It's they apply COLA first and then they take out 10% reduction. And I see that you are shaking your head.
Well, they get to pretend that they're providing COLA then, which is absurd.
Which is kind of, because it's a statutory COLA, so they have to apply statutory COLA on the previous allocation. So that's a legal requirement.
They're clearly not doing.
It's one of the compliance issues for the state of California. So that's how this complicated 7.92% came about. And that was such a complicated thing that even FICMAT took about 11 days to figure out how to calculate that in the financial model they use for LCFF calculation.
So, okay, so I because of the example you gave with the 2.31 and the 102 point minus, why, maybe I'm not understanding it. The minus 7.92, shouldn't that change each year? Because the following year, excuse me, the 2.48 would be 102.48, and then you take away the 10%, that brings us down. So it's not exactly the same as the previous year. And then the same for the 3.26.
So what they did, I mean, one thing is statutory language, and the law has not been signed yet. For the sake of ease and for the sake of calculation, FICMAT and School Services of California, they are recommending to use exact same number for next year and the following year. With qualification that this number is going to change, we already know that. But since they had to devise or reprogram the FICMAT software for LCFF calculation, they have plugged in these factors in the LCFF calculator model.
So the other easy answer, because I had the same question and I tried to do the math multiple times and it never worked out. So it's just the 10% and the subtraction of that, because if you do the math, it doesn't work out. But based on the formula that FigMat came out, that's what the suggestion that they're coming up with. So I had the same complication with that.
So I think that will be good during the presentation on Wednesday to highlight this first, the statutory language that we have to say that it's the mandated COLA and yet 10% across the board cut. So I think that would be a very good point to make on Wednesday when you're doing that presentation, because that's not clear. And I think to Ann's point, so really it's not a COLA, but so it's a misnomer of what is really happening.
Yes.
Yeah, or a misnaming of what's really
Misnaming, yes.
happening.
Mhm.
Okay, that now makes more sense in my brain, but I probably need to hear it again on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if I may add something, one more thing, we are answering one of the questions from Board of Education, and I try to explain that mathematically for the first year only, not for the next year or the following year. But the first year, I have explained that, try to explain that mathematically in the response.
Oh, okay. So what you mean is when we get the responses, we'll see that specific to the 2.31 for next year. Okay.
Yes, I
And
have
we should-
explained that mathematically using my own method of explaining that the way I try to understand myself.
Right. And so what you're saying is somebody like me should read that and be able to extrapolate and put the same kind of calculation for the following 2 years.
I'm hoping that, yes.
Oh, okay.
During another meeting, the conversation came up around the board reserve and whether or not we chose to go to a lower reserve, what that would look like. I'm not saying I'm in favor of that, but I'm interested if you can tell us the amount of money that 0.5 equals.
So roughly speaking, 1% is about $4 million. Because we have a budget of about 400 million, 1% is 4 million, 0.5% would be $2 million.
So it doesn't get anywhere near where the money that we need.
No, 2 million is
Right.
really
Drop in the bucket. Can
drop
you
in the bucket.
2 million a drop in the bucket? The other point that was made in that meeting is though we may have made cuts to the budget already, that it will depend on what is actually materializes. And, same with the income we were expecting, such as the lottery fund or donations, it's pretty unlikely that we will see those incomes at the level we had anticipated before all this happened.
Facility fees in addition. I mean, we were expecting, we're going to increase our facility fees so that we could realize a higher revenue on those. And now that's not going to happen at all.
Well,
How is that?
Well, to be clear, we are going to increase the facility fees. However, I think the problem is that we are probably, I think we're going to suffer a little in our ability. I think maybe because of the economy, we may not be as renting as our facilities as much as we had in the past. So that's definitely a real impact.
Yeah, I think that's another conversation on whether or not, like the facilities that are on here already on this agenda, whether or not what our comfort level is with having our facilities rented at all, given the current situation and what the impact. So even if we went forward, okay, we rent them, what is our expectation of having additional staffing to do additional cleaning because of our current reality? So even if we're receiving revenue it won't be at the level which we would have anticipated because of funds we would need to expend. So as far as, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to really dig into this as much as I would have liked yet. So how is it built into this document? Or is it? Or is that something we're anticipating once we have the actual reality of what we are not anticipating receiving?
Are you
I mean, like.
And are we still talking about facility rentals?
No. Sorry, that was really convoluted. So I'm going to rephrase. So we know we're not going to receive as much lottery funds, but I'm assuming in this preliminary budget, that's actually not even captured here because we don't know what that really looks like. So is that planned in here at all, or is it going to be potentially significantly worse than we might anticipate?
Well, so we do get those parameters from the state through school services and FICMAT. So we do have the amount of lottery per ADA we can expect. As you said, it does not appear at this time to be deficited. And Rice, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine if once they get better information that by first interim, that may change. They may restate those lottery numbers, but right now, I don't see them significantly impacted in the projection right now. Is that correct, Rice?
Yes, that's correct. The School Services of California is maintaining exactly the same lottery allocations as their previous projections. They are not projecting a decline in lottery revenues, but they did provide guidance that the interest rates are going down. So that has an impact on our interest revenues for all funds, general fund and other funds.
And they have already publicly stated that lottery revenues are down 30%. So I would imagine, and that it is possible by first interim they may be restating that those lottery per ADA expectations for us.
And since you brought up the ADA, has there been a conversation of what that is going to look like in the future if we, for example, have to continue on a virtual path? How do we document attendance and?
So our understanding right now, that is part of the budget discussions because every district is asking the same question. We all are anticipating that our ADA is going to be impacted. So they are talking about a hold harmless for next year. So we'll have to see how the conversation goes, and we'll update the board as we get that information. I would imagine it's going to be part of the part of the budget detail that comes with the governor's final budget.
There's also some discussion about whether it's going to be instructional days or instructional minutes. We're trying to push for instructional minutes to get more credit versus the instructional days. There's legislation on that. We're not sure where that's going to take us, but hopefully with a distance learning piece, we would definitely benefit from the instructional minutes versus the instructional day. So we'll see what legislation happens maybe by August when we revisit the budget again.
All right. And when you say hold harmless, do you think as it was this year, they would just go back to a previous year as the baseline?
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Yes.
So I don't know if you have other questions, Michelle, but one question that we received from somebody in CNS is about the CNS tech being eliminated, where they're understanding that position would not be eliminated. It seems to me that was in the
and we are going to try to revisit that sheet that had the reductions on it, especially as it relates to staffing. The information that was provided was actually from the February 26th, and it needs to reflect the update that the board made at the, I believe it was in the April board meeting. So that needs to be updated. I think the board did make some adjustments, and we'll correct that.
And then I think my final thing for now is just, I don't know if you'll be able to get this by, or let us know on Wednesday. There are a couple references to BringHers on whether we're opening BringHers in the fall or not. And that, while it's our ultimate decision, there's some parameters around our ability to open BringHers, and that depends on the developers. So we can't really you're asking for guidance on that or board direction, but we can't have that, we can't give direction if we don't have all the information. So if it's possible to get that by Wednesday, that would be helpful for us to be able to give direction.
Right now, there's nothing precluding the board from opening BringHers. It's really the district. And Raul, you can cut in if I'm not hitting the points right. But I think it's just a matter of us as a district and board making a decision. There are not enough students right now from the BringHers from the development area. So we would actually, at this point, we would have to either assign students there or assign a program there in order to open. And that's something that I don't know, and I'll defer to Raul. I'm not sure if in this short time span we can do that, because a lot of those students have already been assigned to schools, from my understanding. But Raul, I'll let you continue.
So, Michelle, are you asking about the agreement between the developers and saying you're not allowed to occupy the school until X happens, and we still needed more information from the developers on that? And so, Marcus, you did follow up on that, and you said that we are clear to go. We don't need to wait for any other exceptions or regulations that the developers.
No, we don't. No, we have nothing inhibiting us at this point.
So then the only requirement from the board is that number of 165, 167, I believe. We're not going to meet that number again in August. So now the board needs to decide, what do we do with BringHers? Like Marcus said, do we place a program there, or do we assign students there? And there's so many variables, such as if we need to do the social distancing, is that going to be another possibility that we maybe have students go there to help out with the social distancing? It's not going to solve the problem district-wide, but it might alleviate some of the sites. So there's several variables that we'll need to think about moving forward.
Thank you. Yes, that was my question about the developers have given us the go ahead. So we have the liberty now of putting students there, even though we don't have their allotted seats that we have to accommodate. So I guess the question is, do they have any updated numbers for us about how many kids are coming from their development?
And I think the last update that I saw, between now and August, they'll probably be up between 40 and 50 students, which is still nowhere near the goal. But their numbers do show that by next year this time, they should have the number of students to open it, based on the board's previous directive of 165 students.
Thank you. Sorry, you didn't want to hear what I was just asking, because the other question is about making $35 million worth of cuts. So if we're having an intense conversation about $35 million, I think that should not be part of a regular board meeting. That needs to be pulled separately, because it's going to be an intense, in-depth discussion.
Absolutely.
So you're suggesting that maybe the board meeting on the 24th to have either a study session before or a continued discussion? Well, obviously, we're going to have a continued discussion to adopt the budget, but you're asking for more time?
Well, I'm just thinking back to our budget cuts of last February and March, where we really needed only to focus on the budget and not be thinking about 20 other agenda items along with the budget, because we had a hard time, as you all remember. You all were there sitting with us. We had a very difficult time coming to terms with some of the recommendations, and not because recommendations were bad. It was because how do we grapple with sacrificing rigor and excellence for the sake of the money? So it's a complicated conversation, and I think because it involves so many stakeholders in our community, I think having a separate discussion that's not part of June 24th. I'd like us to, I know we kind of cringe at this word of a menu of options, but we need a menu, we need all the possibilities, knowing that we're pretty bare bones and we're pretty lean already. So I have no way in my mind, I can't even conceive of that $35 million. So I guess my request is that if we're having a study session, it needs to be a more in-depth, not just a 30-minute kind of study session, but we really need to have time set aside that we're only focusing on this before June 24th, when we have to vote on it.
And just to clarify, it was not our intent to have the board vote on the 24th. We were just going to provide some information from the recession of actions that the board had taken, and just kind of revisit what some of the options are, just mainly just for review and discussion as we adopt the budget. I agree that maybe those should be two separate items, but the idea for the 24th is to get the board to approve a resolution that they will, of the intent to make those reductions by the August 12th 45-day budget revision date. We also believe that as part of the governor's budget, there will be flexibility to allow for the second layoff window in August, which would be August 15th. So the idea would be is that we would have time to work with the board and with the bargaining groups and stakeholders from the 24th, I would say up through the end of July, first week of August, to come up with some recommendations that the board could act on the 12th. But I do agree that in between that time, we probably want to have a meeting, maybe a meeting, as you indicated, Michelle, to kind of go a deep dive into some of the options at that time.
Yeah, I think a study session is warranted. And as you pointed out, Marcus, what we have to provide to Alameda County is our intent, not an actual laundry list of what we're going to do. So we have a little bit more time, but even by August, that's not a lot of time, especially when we will not necessarily know, I'm assuming by the 12th, when do we expect to hear from the governor on his rejiggering of the budget based on tax revenue. If tax revenue, people have an extended window, then they'll start to understand, what's coming in, and that will impact us under Prop 98. But so I think it is clear with this large of a cut that it's going to touch every bargaining unit. It's going to touch every unit. There's no way for it not to. But the big challenge we're facing, I would say, is in the past, one of the things that we've had the ability to do with the hope of having it be temporary is to increase class size. But if in this situation, how do we do that when we can't have additional kids in the classroom? So that becomes even more of a conflict. So I think absolutely it's going to be a big discussion. And if on the June date, we're not intended to have that discussion, I think that needs to be very clear, because I can see us getting into the weeds, having a pre-discussion that may not be productive without all the background information.
Yes, thank you. I thought we were voting on something on the 24th. So if we're not, that does buy us a little bit of time, but really not a whole heck of a lot more time.
Well, since you guys were all poised to vote, maybe we should have brought something on the 24th.
Only if you have something in between.
We will definitely, hopefully by then, we'll definitely have some input from our employee groups and some groups to review and start the discussion that will take place on the 24th.
All right, thank you. My next question was about the LCAP surplus, because this is something that comes up year after year about not, well, part of it is specific to LCAP, but part of it is specific to the overall budget about these surpluses that we have, and why we aren't able to spend the money the way we had said the previous year that we were going to allocate and spend the money. So, you know, part of that goes back to our previous conversation with construction is, are we not properly planning? Are we, what kinds of changes are happening that we should be aware of so that we don't have these kinds of surpluses? I think you know where I'm going with that. So that was my general question about LCAP.
I mean, I would say, and maybe Raul has some information on this. I would say that the whole thing with COVID-19 had a lot to do with how that program was spending money. I think that program was impacted by that. I mean, we'd have to talk to Debbie and Christy Rocha to get more detail, but I do think that played a large part. The one thing that we did talk to Debbie Ashmore about was that we are going to have to make a cut to the LCAP for the upcoming budget year. It's about $1.8 million, which is that program share of the reduction based on the supplemental funding that we set aside. So. But I don't have any more information than that in terms of the specifics, but I do think that our current dynamics had something to do with it.
But Debbie also mentioned that there may have been a change in how they allocated for professional development, and that did not occur. And
Yeah.
so there was no other plan for that. So for example, there was supposed to be professional development at the end of the school year after the teacher workday, so June 12th. And there was supposed to be on mental health, training staff to help students with mental health. That training fell through, and so now they have this abundance of money left. So there's some variables to that, and I guess moving forward, we'll have to probably get more in concrete, in written form, as far as this is the plan. Make sure you contract out whatever needs to be contracted way ahead of time and start the planning process sooner rather than later. So that may be another area that we need to work on as the committee gets together to start budgeting for next school year.
I see that we're, oh, yeah, I see that we're just about out of time. Anne, did you have any last things that you wanted to comment on? I had one thing, but I'm not specific to the budget.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a very uncomfortable time, and you know, we're dealing with the pandemic as one thing, but just remembering that people are putting their lives out or putting themselves out, and I just want to acknowledge the bravery that a lot of people in our community have been showing us, and want to thank everybody for that, and hope that we are all able to stay safe and and come together. So
Yeah, I'm there with you. I think that now, if COVID wasn't enough, the events of the last few days have shown us even more that we are unable to do the best if we're not in it together. So I hope everyone feels that support from us that I think the board has for you as staff and for the work that you do and the people who you are. So thank you for your dedication and everything you provide.
Thank you. I think it's affecting everybody in one way or another, and it's just unbelievable how we just try to continue to come together as a community to strive forward. So thank you.
thank you all. See you
Thank you.
Wednesday.
All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.